Again, welcome to tonight's Tuesday study. We're looking at the footsteps of Messiah in the book of Leviticus. And I want to look tonight at what's known in the law of Moses as consecration of the firstborn, and also at redemption of the firstborn, because they kind of go hand in hand. And if you're wondering where it fits into the life of Yeshua, if you're wondering why these commands were given and why it's so significant in Messiah's life, then hopefully tonight we'll discover that. Now, the first time we read about the consecration of the firstborn is in Exodus chapter 13 and verse 2. In this verse, the Lord will not only make a declaration, but he will explain a little bit, but not very much, about why. So let's read it together. Exodus 13 and verse 2. Consecrate to me all of the firstborn. Whatever is the first to open the womb among the people of Israel, both man and beast, is mine. So this is God's declaration. He is laying claim to the firstborn. And actually what Moses is learning from the Lord is what they are to do when they enter the land. And I think that fundamentally what the Lord wants to remind them of is the whole redemption, how God reached out his arm, how he brought them out of slavery and into a land of freedom, the land that flows with milk and honey. And ultimately, it's a journey of redemption. He will say more about what it means later in the book of Numbers. And of course, the explanations are much fuller after. And when we read Exodus 13 verse 2, we're not sure if this is included in the instructions before or on the day of the Exodus. So I'm not sure that that is terribly important, but it is important what God has to say. When we look in the book of Numbers, we're going to get some explanation. We'll have the same declaration that all of the firstborn belong to him, but this time the Lord will fill in more information, and he's going to give the people his reasoning and the meaning behind the principle of consecrating all of the firstborn to him. So again, we read in chapter 3, verse 13 of the book of Numbers, on the day when I struck down all of the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I consecrated for my own all of the firstborn in Israel, both of man and beast. They shall be mine. I'm the Lord. Now, I'm sure you'll remember that the very last plague that the Lord sent upon the land of Egypt was the death of the firstborn. It was on that last night that every firstborn male child died, along with all the firstborn of the animals in the land of Egypt. It was also, of course, on that night when the children of Israel killed the male lamb and put its blood on the doorposts of their home. And so it was, as the Lord passes over the homes of the children of Israel, that their children are saved. But as he passes over the homes of the Egyptians, death comes to all of the firstborn. This was no doubt the punishment that the Lord chose to mete out upon Egypt because Pharaoh had ordered the death of all of the male children. Now, the Lord needs to explain to them how they are to keep and why they are to keep the ritual. So further down in Exodus 13 verse 15, to go backwards, we read, For when Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, this is the answer, of course, that the Israelites are to give, the reason for why they're doing what they're doing. For when Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed all of the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and firstborn of animals. Therefore, I sacrificed to the Lord all the males that first opened the womb, but all of the firstborn of my sons I redeem. So the Lord is telling them what they were to do. And clearly, it's a reminder of that redemption, that deliverance from slavery in Egypt. Through the blood of a lamb placed on the doorposts, all of the firstborn of the children of Israel, the children of Jacob, living in the land of Goshen, were redeemed, delivered from the death that swept across the land. And I believe that they were commanded to do this as a reminder of redemption. And I guess when we look at it now, we can say, little did they know that the Lord would later send his own Son as the perfect Lamb of God, who redeems all from sin and death. A free gift for all, but contingent upon faith. And I guess we can even draw lessons about Yeshua being the firstborn himself. We can turn to verses like Colossians 1 verse 15, where we read, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. Or in Hebrews 1:16, and again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, let all God's angels worship him. We also know that the New Testament calls him the firstborn from among the dead. So we can understand perhaps why this tradition remains part of Jewish life even today. The rabbis tell us that it provides a powerful reminder that everything and everyone belongs to God. Today in the Jewish community, this is known as the ritual of Pidyon Haben. So Pidyon Haben, or the redemption of the firstborn son, is that ceremony where the father of the firstborn male child would redeem his son by giving 5 silver coins to the Cohen in the temple. And the Cohen, of course, was a priestly descendant of Aaron, roughly 30 days after the baby's birth. Now, the practical outworking of this is that it led to this practice whereby all the firstborn were dedicated to God. And the firstborn males are brought to the Kohanim, the priests. The firstborn animals were offered as special sacrifices. But the firstborn sons were supposed to enter the priesthood or into priestly service. And if you were to read the story of the Exodus, you'll discover that there comes a point where Moses and Aaron count all of the firstborn sons, and every single one of them is redeemed at the sum of 5 shekels, and that money goes to the priesthood. However, by the time we end up moving forward in time, we discover that something else has happened. And we encounter a little bit more information about the command and the justification for the development of these traditions. In Numbers 3, verse 41, we read this: "And you shall take the Levites for me. I am the Lord. Instead of the firstborn from among the people of Israel, and the cattle of the Levites, and all of the firstborn among the cattle of the people of Israel." Well, according to Jewish tradition, and we'll discover that the texts bear this out, God's original intention was to make a priesthood out of the firstborn sons of the generation who came out of the wilderness, and perhaps to take firstborn sons from every future generation to continue to maintain the priesthood. But at the end of Exodus, the book of Exodus, we discover something that changes everything that God has to say. Because, well, let's read what it says, and then we'll find out the because. In fact, the because will be pretty obvious. Why does God choose a Levitical priesthood rather than a priesthood made up from the firstborn among the Jewish people? Well, let's read Exodus chapter 32 from verse 25. And we'll read down to verse 29. "And when Moses saw that the people had broken loose, for Aaron had let them break loose to the derision of their enemies, then Moses stood at the gate of the camp and said, 'Who is on the Lord's side? Come to me.' And all of the sons of Levi gathered around him. And he said to them, 'Thus says the Lord God of Israel, put your sword on your side, and each of you go to and fro from gate to gate throughout the camp. And if each of you must kill his brother and his companion and his neighbor.' And the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses. And that day about 3,000 men of the people fell. And Moses said, 'Today you have been ordained for the service of the Lord, each one of you at the cost of his son and of his brother, so that he might bestow a blessing upon you this day.'" This is the moment where we see a change. God's intention was for the firstborn to be a priestly community. But as a result of the golden calf, we discover something else has occurred. Of course, we know that Aaron, well, poor Aaron, I do wonder at him. Moses confronts him and he kind of, you can almost imagine him shrugging. "Well, it really wasn't me, sir. I kind of threw the gold in and out came a cow. A golden one, if you please." I love the fact that we don't read Moses' rebuke of Aaron. I'll come back to that. But Numbers 18, verse 16, provides each family the right to buy back their sons from the service to the Lord. And we read in Numbers 18, verse 16, "When they are a month old, you are to redeem them at the redemption price of 5 shekels of silver by the sanctuary shekel, or 20 gerahs." Now, clearly, God is saying now, My priesthood will be from among the Levites. And from now on, if you want to keep your sons, you must buy them back because they belong to me. So by the time we get to the birth of Yeshua, how do we see all of this play out? How do we get from the command in the Torah, the law of Moses, to the life of Yeshua? Well, it's probably worth reading Luke's gospel for this. And we'd have to go to Luke chapter 2. So I'm going to turn there as well. And we'll read a little bit from Luke's gospel, chapter 2. Now, in Luke 2, verse 7, we read that Mary gives birth to her firstborn son. She wraps him in swaddling and laid him in a manger because there was no place for them at the inn. And you have to go further down to the chapter to find out really what happens later. Now, we don't read about his circumcision, but we know that he was. I'll come back to that. In Luke 2:22, we read, "And when the time came for their purification, according to the law of Moses, they brought him up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord." What's being spoken about here is a verse in Leviticus chapter 12. So let's turn over and see what Leviticus chapter 12 has to say. In Leviticus chapter 12, we have a section on purification after childbirth. And we read that the Lord in verse 1 says, "Speak to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, if a woman conceives and bears a male child, she shall be unclean for 7 days, as at the time of her menstruation she shall be unclean. And on the 8th day the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Then she shall continue for 33 days in the blood of her purifying. She shall not touch anything holy, nor come to the sanctuary until the days of her purifying are completed." Now that's quite interesting, because in Luke's gospel, we read that it was at the time of her purification, when it was over, she came. And in verse 6 of Leviticus chapter 12, we read, "And when the days of her purification are completed, whether for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a lamb a year old for a burnt offering, and a pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. And he shall offer it for her." And then in the last verse of Leviticus 12, verse 8, we read, "And if she cannot afford a lamb, then she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for the burnt offering and the other for the sin offering. And the priest shall make atonement for her, and she shall be clean." Right, let's go back to Luke's gospel and find out what Mary and Joseph did in relation to Jesus and Mary's purification. So in Luke chapter 2, helps if I'm actually in Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2. Luke 2:21. And at the end of 8 days, when he was circumcised, he was called Yeshua, Jesus, the name given by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. Verse 22. And when the time came for their purification, according to the law of Moses, they brought him up to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every male who first opens of the womb shall be called holy to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice according to what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Now, clearly, we know that Yeshua didn't come from a wealthy family. His father was a carpenter, and they clearly couldn't afford a lamb for a burnt offering. So what they're bringing is in accordance with the law, 2 turtle doves. Now, Yeshua's parents would have clearly understood the command to circumcise was a lasting ordinance in all of their generations. And even if they had fully understood all of the angelic revelations, they would have found themselves unable to break this command. And so we read about his circumcision according to the law on the 8th day. And then we also read about the offering of the 2 turtle doves or pigeons for Miriam's purification. Now, Mary and Joseph, they took the baby Yeshua, to the priests in respect to the ritual of purification. And as we read, as the poor offered 2 turtle doves. But you know that we don't read anywhere in the Gospels is that they ever paid the redemption price of 5 shekels, or the sanctuary shekel, or 20 gerahs. Now, Mary and Joseph, they fulfilled all of the requirements of the law. But again, they didn't pay the 5 shekels, which is the redemption price for the firstborn. Somehow his parents knew not to pay the redemption price. And we know from the book of Hebrews that his priesthood was not on the basis of his birth, for he was neither a Levite or a Cohen. For every high priest, we read in Hebrews 8, verses 3 to 4, is appointed to offer gifts and sacrifices. Thus it is necessary for the priests to have something to offer. Now, if he were on earth, he would not be a priest at all, since there are priests who offer gifts according to the law. But back in Hebrews 5:10, we're told that he is a priest in the order of Melchizedek. Now, fundamentally, that means that Yeshua was consecrated to the Lord's service and to the service of the priesthood. In effect, from God's perspective, but also that of the Torah, he belonged to the Levitical priests. In Matthew 5:17, Yeshua, Jesus, his own mouth, this is what he says: "Do not think I came to abolish the Torah and the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill." And it's really important that we understand that the word here literally in Greek means to make full, or to fill up, or fill to the full. or it makes something complete, kind of fill it up to the top so that there is nothing wanted. It is to the full measure or to the consummate number. In other words, it makes complete in every particular so as to render something perfect. This is Thayer's Greek definitions. It means to bring something to realization. And so when we're talking about the ministry of Yeshua, he came to carry it through to the end, to accomplish it, to carry out everything required of him. In other words, to bring his ministry to full realization. So when we talk about the sayings and the prophecies of Yeshua, it's to bring them to pass. In other words, to cause God's will, as made known in the law, to be obeyed as it should be, and God's promises given through the full prophets to receive their fulfillment. So how is this word used in the New Testament? When we talk about fulfilled prophecy, we mean that which was spoken by a prophet might be fulfilled, brought to pass. Interestingly, it's the same word that's used when the disciples were out fishing and their nets were full to breaking point. When the nets were full, they would draw them ashore. It can also, in a couple of other ways, be used to be, in John 16:24, to be fully joyful. Ask and you will receive that your joy may be full. Or Acts 2:28, you have made known to me the paths of life. You make me full of gladness in your presence. Or when something has been completed, in Acts 7:30, when 40 years had passed, they'd been fulfilled, they'd been completed. So when Yeshua is speaking, he is making this declaration that he has done everything according to the law and the prophets. He's kept the law perfectly. That means that if his parents had offered the 5 shekels or the silver shekel coin, temple coin, then he would not be allowed to be a priest, even in God's economy. But because his parents don't bring the redemption price, Yeshua is in effect consecrated to the priesthood when he's just over a month old. And we know that he has a different priesthood. He's not of the tribe of Levi. He's not a Cohen. He's not a descendant of Aaron. He is a priest in the order of Melchizedek. And so we have a completely different set of parameters for the priesthood of Yeshua. And I did mention that I always think about this when I think of the priesthood of Yeshua. In Hebrews, we're told that he's a priest like Aaron, a sympathetic high priest who's able to sympathize with our weakness. Well, that's simple. He's walked where we've walked. But I do love the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, Aaron is not chastised with Moses' anger. And if I had been Moses and had had my way, I'd have said, that's it, Aaron, you're done. No priesthood from you. The Levites, yes, but not you. You're out. But he becomes the high priest. And it just tells me that when Aaron stood in front of the people to receive their offerings, he could never look down on them. He could never be harsh with them, because he had fallen in the biggest way possible. He had led the people of Israel astray, so much so that 3,000 men were killed on that day. And so he's a sympathetic high priest. And Yeshua is like Aaron in that he's sympathetic. And he's a high priest because he was consecrated. All the firstborn belong to me. You want your firstborn son back? You don't want him to serve in the priesthood? Then you pay the 5 shekels, because that goes to the support of the Levitical tribe. The Levites have no inheritance. They're given no land. So the tithes that come into the temple are for the financing of the Levites who serve in the temple. And that is the blessing of, it's the basis on which we support our missionaries. It's the basis on which we support our pastors. And we, where possible, we don't ask them to go out and have a second job, but we want them to be free in the service of God without having to worry about their financial support. And this is where we get it from. And also Paul's saying the worker is worthy of his hire. So it's, the very first time I looked at this and I realized that the basis of Yeshua's priesthood was one, theological, on the basis of his genealogy, being without beginning and without end, in the way that Melchizedek was. Well, we have no genealogy for Melchizedek. He's a priest in the order of Melchizedek, and Melchizedek is the first priest of the Most High. He's not by Levitical descent. He's a priest before we even have the birth of Jacob and the sons of Jacob who will become the 12 tribes. We have a priest that God sees as his man in that job. And Yeshua is a priest in the order of Melchizedek. And he's a priest because his parents did not pay the redemption price. And he was legitimately, and people talk about Yeshua having no legitimate right to the priesthood. He did. He was legitimately a priest in the order of Melchizedek, not only because of his genealogy or lack thereof, earthly genealogy, but because the redemption price wasn't paid for him. I hope that's shed a little light on an unusual couple of verses in the book of Leviticus and in the Old Testament that speak forward prophetically to Yeshua. And so this series is all about seeing the footsteps of Messiah in the Old Testament. So I hope that's been of help tonight. And I look forward to seeing people next week. So join us same time, same place, Tuesday nights at 7.